Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel for more interesting stories like these. Now, let's get into today's story video. Hubby slept with every woman except me. My soon-to-be ex-husband was a really gorgeous guy, and on our first date, I felt like the happiest woman alive. We decided when we married that I would make the majority of the money and handle the majority of the housekeeping while he cooked me supper and finished his bachelor's degree. That was the idea, at least. He failed class after class because he refused to perform the work and skipped class to play video games and moan about how miserable he was. During our dates before marriage, he was charming and attentive. He was lost in his own world after the marriage, and convincing him to go on a date night was like pulling teeth. After the honeymoon, they got less frequent and eventually ended after a year and a half. He preferred plump gals, and at 120 pounds, I wasn't quite enough for him. My weight, or lack thereof, had not been an issue for the we had before the marriage, but now the pressure was on for me to acquire weight. Every woman who enters a marriage trying to transform her guy into someone he is not, there is a man who does the same to his new wife. I couldn't talk about it with my female pals. In our culture, there are no words to describe a woman locked in a less marriage. I was probably the only lady in my state in her late 20s who had to beg her spouse for. So my marriage was afflicted from the start by an unnamed ailment. I had always assumed, probably stupidly, that marriage was intended to resolve rather than generate tension. I did not marry in order to never have again. Because he was depressed, he reduced the frequency of prepared meals from daily to once a week. He also no longer accompanied me to family and social gatherings. Again, I did not get married to attend gatherings alone. But I remained patient. I persuaded myself that it was his mental condition, not our marriage, that was the issue. When he mentioned contemplating suicide, I concealed any potentially deadly medicines. Every day, I came home from work hoping not to discover my spouse dead. When he declared he was going to walk out our front door and not come back until he died, I blocked it with my body and dialed 911. I ended up canceling the 911 call after he promised not to damage himself while I was at work. My nickname on this site derives from the fact that our life together was like a soap opera, an emotional roller coaster that never stopped. I was never sure if he was going to beg for hugs or shout at me. I was walking on eggshells. I was washing dishes one day when he came into the kitchen, saying, "I'm going to become an astronaut, and if you don't support my goal, I'm cutting you out of my life." He was 28 and still didn't have his bachelor's degree, so I was quite confident being an astronaut wasn't in his destiny, but I didn't say anything after that outburst. I eventually persuaded him to seek professional assistance. Although the worst habits were no longer prevalent, we never regained the connection we had before we married. At that time, I felt more like a mother to a troubled adolescent than a wife. His mood fluctuations went beyond the scope of typical bipolar illness. He didn't want a wife. He wanted a mother figure without parental control. It's possible that his own mother abandoned him at the age of 14 to live with relatives in a faraway nation had anything to do with it. When I discovered his explicit messages to one of his community college students, it did not spell the end of my marriage. He had by this point found work as a part-time tutor. It didn't come when he revealed his plan to leave me for yet another lady who, strangely, turned him down once he was free. No, my marriage ended when I heard him enter the front door and thought, "OCRP, he's home." That moment arrived long before I had any idea about his business. In some ways, seeing the messages was a relief since it provided me with a reason for divorce. I was raised in a conventional family where divorce was strongly discouraged. So much so that after confronting him about the messages, I forgave him and determined to work on our marriage. He eventually left me for the other lady. So there you have it. I financially and emotionally supported this guy for years, only to have him flip on me when he realized the grass was greener on the other side. Before you could say gold digger, he wanted me to purchase him a flat-screen TV as a parting present. After I found out about the adultery, I assured him that my leaving present to him would not be mimicking Lorna Bobbitt. He also asked if I wouldn't mind abandoning the apartment, the bills for which I had paid entirely with my own money, if he desired romantic nights with his mistress. I advised him to boil his head, walk off a little pier, and then F himself. Some people's heads are so far up their own that they can't see straight. Slowly, my self-esteem began to recover. I had no idea how much I had given into him and how much of myself I had lost until I had nothing left to lose. He obtained our house due to some unique legal situations, but it was well worth it to be free again. My conservative upbringing completely failed me. When this COVID-19 thing is through, I'm going back to escorting. At the very least, they will perform the job for which they are getting paid, rather than expecting me to wait on them hand and foot after a hard day's work, and they will be open about the fact that they are seeing other women. Best of all, they will not be able to seize my house or half of my assets. Fin. Story 2. I caught my wife cheating with her boss. I'm not sure of how to move on. My wife and I have been married for over 10 years. We've been married for over 5 years and have gone through a lot together. We met in college, and I took additional courses to catch up so that we could graduate together in 2012. Soon after graduation, I saved up enough money to attend a game design school in Canada, and I offered her to join me. The simplest way for Canada to admit her was for us to marry. So I proposed, and we married 3 months later. We're just a few weeks away from beginning our new life in Canada. Everything was fantastic and wonderful for a time since everything was new to us. Because the school I enrolled in was incredibly rigorous and demanding, studying gradually began to take up more and more of my time. I was ready to devote all of my time and efforts to it since the program's success would decide my prospects of finding a job in the business. This, of course, made her feel lonely and unimportant. This was one of the first obstacles we encountered as a team, and they only became more and more intricate from there. This, in some ways, cooled us and helped us to communicate more effectively as a pair. It compelled us to identify our long-term objectives as people, and it highlighted our differences for us to work on, which we did. I ultimately obtained the job I had worked so hard for, and things gradually improved. The relationship had its ups and downs, but it was never utterly unbearable. Until last year, that is. It was evident that some of our disagreements as a couple were becoming less difficult to resolve. There were, however, certain essential variances that were always there. So I chose to accept until I began to detest the amount of emotional strain I was putting myself through in order to enjoy a single weekend without bickering. This finally made me feel like I was married to a little sister who was trying to avoid an argument by walking on eggshells. My libido had entirely vanished, and I was frantic to discover out why. This is when the snowball began to roll down the hill. I couldn't stop staring at her as if she were demanding too much of me, and I could feel myself sinking into a vicious cycle that would lead me away from what I had battled for so long. I got more angry at my choices. Eventually, I felt entirely disconnected, and I began to rely only on my job and my interest to get me through the day. She expressed how lonely she felt, and with what little energy I had left, I attempted to convince her that this was all transitory, that this cycle was unusually dark, but that we would soon rise together and feel better again. When I found out last week, it felt like I was jumping into very cold water. I saw a text message from her supervisor flashing across the screen of her computer. It was late, and she had informed me she had gone dancing with her friends, so this was a red signal that I couldn't help but click on and initiate the discussion. I read a lot of stuff I wish I hadn't. As I scrolled through the discussion, I could feel my heart sinking and thumping harder and quicker. She was describing how his sister saw him touching her knee, and I ultimately discovered a message from him confirming interaction. I'm getting nauseated just thinking about it. I wish I had known things were that horrible earlier. After that night, I had a day to contemplate before confronting her. She revealed everything. While she was doing so, tears streamed down her cheeks, and I was taken aback. I couldn't exhibit any feelings at the time, since I was terrified and disappointed. I took it all in and offered her 2 options. We could stop everything right then and there, or we could gather our belongings and go away. Or we might put the relationship on hold and continue to live together while we figure out what to do, with the caveat that she give her 2-week notice and resign her job. She decided to give the latter a go. It's been a week and a half now. This really jolted us out of our comfort zones, and things began to improve for every one of us. Seeing her as something I might lose motivated me to fight for something I had taken for granted, and my desire resurfaced. I had missed gazing at her in that way. But what transpired was utterly incorrect and contradictory. We've gone through a lot, and we've chosen to fight for this for as long as we can. I'm certain that what we once had was unusual, and I'm prepared to fight for it. But fear is always there today, and I'm always questioning if I'm making the correct choices. I feel like tossing everything away is foolish, especially now that things are finally better. I told her that I couldn't fully forgive her, but I understood why she felt the way she did. What occurred was simply a symptom of the status of the relationship, and I'll confess that it could have been me in her situation when things went bad for me. Where am I going to draw the line? Am I being too idealistic? Is this a trend that will only repeat itself after we've reached the bottom of our relationship cycle and are back in our comfort zones?